Thank you, Dr. Barter, for coming and visiting with us. And our education series has been really great, but of course was stopped with COVID. So we appreciate you coming virtual with us and sharing your knowledge. And
my pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names, so I think most of you know who I am, Dr. Julie Barter. I practice at Bridge Medical. Most of my practice focuses on difficult cases, things like Lyme disease and mold toxin illness, things we really didn't even know anything about 15 years ago. So that's why we're calling this talk Mold, the Silent Masquerader. It looks like a lot of other things, causes a lot of everyday problems that people just don't know about. So I know a lot of you already know quite a bit about this, but I'm hoping you'll glean some new details. All right. So I don't have any disclosures. I have no financial interest in anything or any of the labs that we're going to discuss today. So nothing to disclose. Okay, so here's what I mean by the silent masquerader. These are a list of symptoms that mold can and does cause. So the most common thing that I think I see in practice is unremitting headaches and migraines. If I only had to pick one thing, it would probably be the top two on this list: headaches, migraines, and fatigue. Almost everybody suffers with those. This is a long list, though. I mean, look at this list. Cognitive decline, brain fog, all of a sudden having trouble doing things that used to be easy, really struggling with schoolwork, with work, vertigo, dizziness, extremely common. Anxiety, I didn't actually put on here, but mood lability issues, depression, very common. And this can be suicidal type depression, very, very serious, needing medical attention. And not just that, but digestive problems, having new food sensitivities, environmental sensitivities come up that really don't make any sense. You know, people will all of a sudden be allergic to dozens of foods that never bothered them before. So long list of stuff you can read. So very bizarre things also can go on, just to draw your attention to the lightning-like jolts, bolts, shooting pains, static shocks, weird sensations. People will get these pain syndromes that really don't make sense in terms of anything else. They don't have brain tumors, they don't have peripheral neuropathies, but they sure look like they do. And MRIs will be normal and all these labs will be normal, but they're really messed up. So let's go into a little bit of why people get so messed up with this stuff. Keep going with the slides. We'll get it wired here. Okay, so what is mold? I think everybody kind of knows, like, oh yeah, that's gross. Something sits in the fridge too long, it grows mold. Definitely don't sniff it, okay? So mold is a really ancient group of microbes that's evolved over a long period of time. It has very simple needs. It needs water. So any humidity above 45% for more than 24 hours is sufficient to feed mold. And it needs organic matter. That's it. So if you've got some seeds, some mold spores, and some organic matter, like, you know, a nice lemon or some very tasty drywall or paper, cardboard, any of that stuff, you've got the perfect recipe for mold. The spores bud, they're budding seeds, if you will, that can establish themselves on a surface. So what you're seeing over here on this yucky drywall is actually a mold that has burrowed into the surface. So it's formed a mycelial mat where you can spray that with bleach to your heart's content, and that may knock off a few of the budding spores on the surface, but you still have a mycelial mat burrowed inside of there that is going to just rebloom the next time the humidity gets to 45% or more. So that's just the first little tidbit about how this stuff actually grows. Okay, so what does this mean to us? Well, it's everywhere. I mean, it's in the soil, it's in the leaves, it's part of the biological breakdown and recycling of organic materials, you know, the deadfall in the forest and recycling people when they've returned to the earth, all of that. So it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous, but not all molds are harmful. Some can cause allergies to some people, and then some, the ones that we're going to focus on, can literally kill people. Ha! So here we go. Beneficial fungi. Check this out. Now, these are also molds, but some of these you guys are going to recognize. Lion's mane, great mushroom for cognitive decline. It's really good at lowering inflammation in the brain. So it's got a history of use for dementia and cognitive decline. Cordyceps, a lot of you are going to know that we use that as an adrenal supplement. It's very good for energizing people who are tired, wrung out, otherwise depleted. And then look at the morels. Yum, yum. Who doesn't like that? So those are fungi too, but the kind that we're going to focus on are these sorts that grow in water damaged buildings. So 50% of US buildings have mold overgrowth from water damage, whether it's current or in the past. And this is even more prevalent now than it used to be in the old days. And here are a few of the reasons. We've got these airtight homes now that we wrap up with this Tyvek wrap. So the ventilation is pretty poor. We've got great seals, which makes things very energy efficient, but then they can't breathe. Here in Montana, we've got a great climate for mold. People think, oh, maybe that's probably in Florida and the Pacific Northwest. Well, I got news for you guys. We are in the Pacific Northwest. So anytime that we have water inside of a building where it's not able to escape into equalizing with the humidity in the outside world, where it condenses is at the interface with the outside world. So around the windows, maybe that's inside of a wall. Maybe that's on the inside of an exterior wall. So lack of humidity control, some of these inferior building materials, carpet, God help us, is just a sponge for these things. And then if you're a pack rat, and please don't be, because that's going to be a recipe for mold. Isaac Fairbaugh, who has worked for Montana Basement Solutions in the past, I'm going to borrow his statement. Where there's dust, there's mold. So where there's clutter, there's going to be mold. So just don't do it. Here's a little graphic, what I'm talking about with these hermetically sealed houses that we have right now. We get them all wrapped up and then they can't breathe. The moisture builds up inside. And the next thing we know, we have a mold problem, especially if there's been a water leak that gives an ongoing moisture source for the mold. So also the building materials that we're using these days are not like the building materials that we used in the old days that were solid wood. Solid wood takes a long time to degrade in nature, but this particle board is just like McDonald's for mold. It's like junk food. It's pre-digested and it's held together with epoxies and glues, which are organic materials. This means yum, yum, jelly donuts for mold. Great stuff.
We put that on the outside of the houses or like as the framing?
So the particle board is usually used for the for outside the framing.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we got drywall on the inside, more good stuff, yum, yum, pre-digested paper board and a little bit of gypsum in there, but still very easy to grow mold. So what we're talking about now is not these benign outdoor molds that are everywhere. We're talking about molds that are specialized to live in these conditions that we've created. So these harmful molds, the reason they're harmful is they produce substances called mycotoxins. Myco means mold, toxin is self-evident. So these mycotoxins are, they convey a survival advantage for the mold. So these are defense mechanisms. They help the molds outcompete other molds. So these toxic molds are the ones that have adapted to these conditions that we've created, help prevent it from being destroyed. And these are very small molecules that travel in the air. So whereas with some testing, you might miss spores on a mold test, these mycotoxins are very, very small gaseous molecules that can diffuse literally right through small cracks in the drywall, small cracks in the floors. So just because you don't find a positive mold spore test on any given type of test doesn't mean there's not a problem lurking behind a wall that maybe the gases may be able to literally diffuse through a wall or up from a crawl space or down from an attic. So this is a picture here. This is a structure of one mold toxin. I don't remember what I pulled down from the internet, but that is the chemical structure of a mold toxin. It's very small. That's a very small compound. That's really 3 rings right there. That's not much bigger than a solvent. And these things, they're sticky. So they stick to surfaces, which means they're really hard to get rid of once they're in a space. So you could think of these mold toxins that produce these mycotoxins as like the super bugs of the mold world. They're resistant to a lot of stuff, and we'll talk some more about that. So think of the mycotoxins as like thorns on a cactus that help prevent it from being attacked by would-be predators. The last thing I want to say here on this slide is not only do these toxic molds produce the mycotoxins, but they also are off-gassing solvents at the same time. And when I say solvents, I mean that literally. Xylene, toluene. I think most people know those are not good things for us. Just the solvents alone, even without the mycotoxins, can make people very dizzy, give them cognitive changes, give them headaches. So we've got a little bit of a double whammy when we have a toxic mold, because we have not only the highly toxic mycotoxins, but we also have this solvent problem. Okay, so why haven't we heard about this in human medicine? The animal husbandry, way ahead of us, which is really not a surprise. So animal husbandry has known about mycotoxins for decades, and that's why they've tested animal feed for a long time, because of these things that they know that mold toxins do to livestock. So if cows get into moldy feed, they produce a lot less milk, they have fertility problems, they produce less offspring. This is all a problem for animal husbandry. That's all about production. Now, these things are not just limited to animals, although it took us a while to catch on to this in human medicine. I actually had a guy who is a livestock dude. I know very little about the livestock animal husbandry industry, but this patient came to me because he had peripheral neuropathy and a number of other problems. And he had some other issues, but mold was among them. And we ran a mold toxin test on this guy. And he comes back very high in this mold toxin called zearalenone that I really had not seen on testing before because it was new on the mold test. And this guy knew exactly what it was. He says, oh yeah, and here's what it does, doc. It causes fertility issues, it screws them all up. And I went, okay. So he taught me something on that one. All right, so here is the earliest medical literature on mold toxins causing human illness. When I graduated from medical school, mold wasn't even anywhere on the radar, not even on the radar. The very earliest published paper that I could find referencing mold causing human illness was in 1998 in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine. These are really the well-known papers. I gave you guys several references. If you want to geek out, please feel free to do so. Bill Ray was really the first doc to publish something about mold causing sick building syndrome. And he's well known in the environmental medicine world. He's published a lot of stuff. Then a few other docs came along and stood on his shoulders, and the names Joe Brewer and Richie Shoemaker probably ring bells, especially Richie Shoemaker. Dr. Joe Brewer, though, is to be credited with publishing a lot of stuff that educated other physicians about mold causing illness in humans. He is a member of the Infectious Disease Society of America and of ILADS as well. So a lot of the Lyme treating physicians who are members of ILADS were the first docs to get educated in this mold toxin illness because of Joe Brewer coming in and talking to us, which was great. Okay, so those are some, a few references. There are more, but those are the ones that really got everything started. Okay, so what are these mycotoxins? We talked about them a little bit. This is a list. It's not a complete list by any means, but it gives you the high points of the major ones and the ones that we can test for in humans. You can read. I don't need to read to you, but this is not a good looking list, you know, causing DNA damage, being documented to be associated with cancer. The gliotoxin is probably one that worries me the most. It causes powerful immune suppression and causes some of the worst cognitive disruptions that I see in practice. Very, very poisonous to the nervous system. Mycophenolic acid is actually used in medicine as a immune suppressant. I'm sure Becky would know the name. Right, Cellcept, yes, Cellcept for resistant cases of rheumatoid arthritis and things along those lines. Ochratoxin is probably the most common one that pops up. This sucker is poisonous to the kidneys, so it can cause a lot of back pain, flank pain. It's damaging to the immune system, and it's clearly associated with some neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Trichothecenes come from black mold, and there's no way for me to overstate the level of fatigue that I see in patients with trichothecenes. These are people who would rather be dead than be alive with this level of fatigue. It can be so severe. I had one guy lived in Eureka. He's a contractor. Took us a while to figure out what was going on with him, but they thought he had narcolepsy. He would literally fall asleep at the wheel on his way down from Eureka to come to work. He'd have to pull over by the side of the road and take a couple naps just to get down here to the Flathead Valley, about an hour away. That doesn't happen anymore now that we got him treated for mold. So we already spoke about zearalenone. That's a reproductive and endocrine toxin.
So the labs you run then specifically say which one they're high in, or
yes,
what
we
to
can.
watch for?
Yes,
Okay.
we can test specifically for which levels are high on most of, yeah, on all of those. Actually, I listed ones that we can test. So I told you a little bit about the mechanism of how those things do wreak havoc in the human body. But what does that mean? Why do we feel badly? So fatigue, really common. I've mentioned that several times. This is because a number of these mold toxins inhibit our mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are the powerhouses in the cells. And if you have a toxin that gets in there, it short circuits the respiratory mechanism of the cell. And the next thing you know, you have a cell that can't produce any energy. That's a problem. If that's in your muscles, that may mean that the muscles burn and ache and feel weak. It makes your energy feel low. People get sick a lot because these things are immunotoxic. So this can be one of the giveaways when there's a sick building, is that the employees are getting sick a lot, or everybody's sick all the time. In a family, we'll often find that half to 2/3 of the family members are sick a lot. The other several are perhaps they're fine because they're not sensitive, but we'll often find that there's a disproportionate number of people in a building who are sick a lot. Pain is also a real hallmark of mold. And these are pain syndromes that really don't seem to make any sense in terms of what we can find going on imaging, on physical exam, on labs, all that stuff. We just really can't make heads or tails of it until we look at the mold piece. Hormone disruption, underappreciated. I get an awful lot of patients who think, oh, it's my thyroid, it's my adrenals. I've seen all these doctors and I'm still messed up. So sometimes things look okay on paper with the hormones. A lot of times they don't, especially as it pertains to the adrenals. So, one last thing here I don't have listed on here about why they make us feel sick. These mycotoxins, a lot of them suppress the pituitary. The brain is very sensitive to these things. And when the pituitary is suppressed, a whole bunch of hormones can get all messed up because the pituitary is a master gland that's the conductor that makes everything else run smoothly. And part of that controls hydration. So one of the really interesting things that most of these mold toxin patients will say is, doc, I'm just so thirsty all the time. And they don't have diabetes, at least not diabetes mellitus. A lot of them have diabetes insipidus, which means water just goes right through them. They drink it and then they're in the bathroom 30 minutes later. And many of them are up 4, 5, 6 times a night to and plan their outings around where the bathrooms are. So let's go into a couple of cases, just talk real life here. So Joan was a 22-year-old female who came to my office with what's called status migrainosus. This young gal had had basically a daily migraine every day or most days for the last 12 years. I checked the numbers because I wanted to make sure I was not exaggerating, and that is indeed the fact. She cried.
22.
She's 22. Yeah. So she had been to the emergency department more times than we could count. Neurology had done every single workup on her that you could hope that they would do. They had tried her on at least 12 or 15 different migraine meds, seizure meds, because she failed all the migraine meds. Nothing worked for her. So this poor gal is running around doing the best she can with head pain that's a 9 or a 10 out of 10 every day for over a decade. My heart really went out to her. It was heart-wrenching to see her crying sitting across from me. So when I dug into her case a little bit, when did these things start? Her bedroom, it turned out, she could see black mold crawling right up the wall of her bedroom, and that's when the migraines started. So on labs, we didn't find a whole lot. She was really B12 deficient and her adrenal function was just terrible. But I thought, okay, we've got something. Let's start with the mold. So what did we start her on? I'll talk a little bit about the mold treatment basics. So this is the, if you want to take a screenshot, this is the time. This is kind of, if you want the cheat sheet and you don't want to take away anything else, this is really the have to know about mold treatment. Toxin binders are at the top of the list. Mold toxins are fat soluble, and so they're continually recycled from the intestine. Every time the liver tries to spit them out, the bowel reabsorbs them. And unless we put a stop to that reabsorption cycle, what we've got is just an endless merry-go-round. So we've got a lot of choices for binders, some of which are prescription. That's cholestyramine, Welchol, and then a lot of natural things that are dirt cheap because they are dirt, right? Yeah, charcoal, bentonite clay. Hey, eat some dirt. You're gonna feel fine.
We always knew dirt was good.
Yeah, we always knew dirt was good for a reason. Yeah, so get into the dirt. And then chlorella. Word of caution on chlorella. Chlorella is notoriously contaminated with cadmium, so you better pick a glass-grown organic chlorella, so you don't wind up in my office for cadmium poisoning, which I've had three of those. Okay, glutathione. My mold toxic patients cannot use glutathione precursors. They actually have to have glutathione given to them because mold disables the glutathione producing enzymes. True story. Detox aids are very helpful. We'll talk about those some more. And then adrenal and hormone supports are absolute musts. Almost universally, not quite, but almost universally, the adrenal hormones are completely hammered. And by that, I mean very, very depleted. And a lot of people will respond well to herbs and glandulars, and some need actual frank adrenal replacement. And then antifungals. Almost everybody needs those, not everybody, but almost everybody. We've got a lot of options there. We've got prescription options, we've got natural options. And you better disinfect the sinuses because think about it, these exposures are inhaled and the sinuses are 100% of the time colonized. So anytime we're able to find mycotoxins in the urine, we can find mycotoxins in sinus washings. So if you're not disinfecting the sinuses, you're not going to get better. Okay, so oops, shoot, I spilled my own beans, darn it. Okay, Joan's treatment, what did I do with her? We put her on a really powerful toxin binder. She was in bad shape. I gave her a powerful antifungal drug. I put her on itraconazole, which is a heavy hitter, and I put her on a prescription antifungal nasal spray. I asked her to take daily liposomal glutathione, put her on some adrenal support, and gave her B12 shots. So she got the basics and then a little extra there in the form of the B12. And what happened, this was so cool. This is about 2 months rather, after I first saw her. She went from daily migraine to no migraines at all. It blew my mind even. So her sinuses were better. Her energy was a lot better. She found a lot of relief from the adrenal support and the B12 shots for her energy, but the migraines went away within, I believe it was about a week of starting the itraconazole orally, which this was a great case. I was really pleased to be part of that.
That's awesome. And at 22, she had her life back. Like,
yes,
amazing.
Back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do another case, another page ripped from everyday life. So Dane was an 11-year-old boy who was brought to me by both of his parents, who looked really worried, and they should have. This young man, very articulate, very well-spoken, very, very mild-mannered young man, really a pleasure. He was also in tears sitting in my office because he was having these episodes of incredibly severe abdominal pain. He'd been to the emergency department on numerous occasions. Gastroenterology had done a fabulous workup with him. I mean, they tested him for celiac and all kinds of stuff that made a lot of sense. And they couldn't find a reason for this. He looked about 8 years old, even though he was 11. He was so malnourished. And his stack of records he came with, you couldn't even believe it. Likewise, when I dug into the history, he had been in a moldy house at the time he got sick, and there was mold at his school building. So this poor kid was getting a double whammy, and he couldn't eat anything. He was just so crippled up with the bowel pain that he basically couldn't eat. He had some funky lab tests. He had some very high inflammatory markers, and a bunch of true food allergies. Not that like, oh, you know, you might not feel so well in a few days when you eat that, but true IgE food allergies to about 100 different foods. It was like, oh my gosh, what is this kid gonna eat? So he couldn't eat. He was allergic to everything. So what did we do with him? I started him on cholestyramine, which is a very powerful, the most powerful toxin binder, and charcoal. I gave him 2 binders, really grab up a whole bunch of mold toxins, act like a huge sponge. And I gave him a medication called cromolyn sodium, which is an antihistamine that's very good for people who are reacting to almost every food. I think this kid was like 2 or 3 foods when I saw him. So he got some probiotics and some glutathione as well. And I also made sure that his house currently that they had moved to did not have mold, and the house was good. So a few other treatment things here that we can do that some of which I did do with DANE, anti-inflammatories. This is just kind of the obvious list, you know, turmeric, boswellia, bromelain, the glutathione we've spoken about already. And then antihistamines can become very helpful in cases like this because the mold can cause so many allergies, so many histamine mediated reactions. So it's a very long list of antihistamines, and all of them apply here. I think I've probably used all of them. So Dane got quite a few of those types of things, and here's what happened with him. It took him about a year, but within about 3 months or so, his gut pain was down, no longer crippling. He could eat more things. He started to put on weight. He started to look like a 12-year-old instead of an 8-year-old. And he did get some antifungal medications as well. We rotated through several different things till we found something that really worked for him. And he actually was smart enough to look at his own case and say, you know, I can cheat a little bit here and skip this or that, but if I skip my toxin binders, I'm back in trouble. So he voluntarily continued his toxin binders for about 1.5 years. And at that time, he was good. He was pretty much back to normal, even though he was still in a school building that arguably wasn't optimal in terms of mold, but he was okay. He was all right. Okay, how about one last mystery case here? So this was a 35-year-old woman with a severe low back pain syndrome. She was actually referred to me by the Montana Pain Center, which is unusual. They were hoping that I would inject her back with prolozone, which is Novocaine and ozone, which works great for the, Joe Blow musculoskeletal arthritis pain. I fell off my bike, fix me sort of thing. And I injected her back on several occasions, and the results were unimpressive. I wasn't pleased. It was not at all what I had come to expect. I thought something else is going on here. So I quizzed her a little bit about her history, and she said, I had that roof leak. And so I had her inspect the house. She had mold in the attic, and she had mycotoxins throughout the house. So strict Candida-like diet, which means no grains, no fruit, no sugar, got her on a paleo-like diet, and put her, again, toxin binders, liposomal glutathione, high-dose anti-inflammatories, and that's where we started. In her case, actually, we never gave her an antifungal drug. I think we gave her some natural stuff. I believe we gave her some oregano. But that's the list of antifungal stuff, some of them. Usually we'll combine 2 or 3 of those things or rotate through things. And a few other things to think about that I did do with Diana. I gave her some urine alkalizers, Alka-Seltzer Gold. I believe she used a few different things, but here's the why of that. If the urine's acidic, these toxins just bounce off the wall of the kidney and are recycled. So alkalizing the urine really helps people pee off a lot more of these toxins, and it alkalizes the bloodstream too. So people feel significantly better. It's low tech and it really helps. Okay, so dealing with mold in home or school, it's best just to get the heck out if you can. That's not always an option. There are a number of kids I've written letters to the school that said, sorry, hey, you figure out something else. They're not coming back in the building. But that's not always an option, especially if it's one's home. So this, if I can emphasize anything, it's that the mycotoxins are the hardest part of this problem to fix. So most of the mold companies can figure out getting rid of the mold source and getting rid of the porous materials and scrubbing and disinfecting things. But what most of these companies don't understand is that the mycotoxins are too small to be grabbed with a HEPA vacuum or their normal industrial air scrubbers and what they typically use to clean. So if a mold contractor can't tell you exactly how they're going to get rid of a mycotoxin, I suggest you find somebody else who can. So this is the very basic how to get the place cleaned up, and some of the mold companies are a lot better than others. If you want my favorite, I'm happy to share that with you at the end. So Diana, I did have her.
So for the record, cleaning with bleach on your own is not the way to go.
Cleaning with bleach. Yeah, let me, that's kind of an obvious one. So cleaning with bleach will inactivate certain mycotoxins, but it doesn't really kill most of the toxic molds. And as I showed you that picture at the very beginning, you can spray bleach or various things on the mold that's on the surface, but it can't reach that mycelial mat that has burrowed into the surface. So really, to properly clean something for mold, you have to get rid of the porous material. The porous material either has to go completely or it needs to be sanded down. And I hope that's not you if you're mold sensitive, and it should be done under negative pressure. So all of the, all the dust is going into the outside world. Yeah, spraying bleach on things is just a way to spread it around, make the mold mad, make it produce more spores so that it doesn't get eradicated. The best thing I've seen for actually killing the mold and getting rid of it safely without killing any humans involved is called Enzicare. It's an enzyme product that also has D-limonene, and it literally digests the mold. Is totally non-toxic unless you happen to be allergic to D-limonene, which, I've seen 1 or 2 of those kinds of people. So that product you can buy, and you can fog the house with it and wipe down with it. And you can get your mold contractor to use that as the cleaning product, because that stuff does work. So that's what we did with Diana. Diana got her house properly remediated according to my specifications. And I only saw her one more time after that. As long as she stuck to her diet, she was pretty good after we got her house cleaned up. That debilitating low back pain that had her worried that she was going to be too disabled to do her job was completely gone, just completely evaporated. And so were her neck pain and burning muscle fatigue and sinus and eye irritation. As long as she stuck to her diet, she stayed pretty good. So testing your home for mold the right way, there's a right way and a wrong way. The little Petri dish test that you can get at Home Depot, I'm not a mold identification expert, probably neither are you. Don't skip that test. Go to mycometrics.com or Real Time Lab and get a reputable test from a reputable lab that can actually identify 40 or so different types of mold species and tell you exact counts. The ERMI and HERTSMI are both excellent tests. I've looked at thousands of ERMIs now and a lot of HERTSMIs. They give you a score that tells you like, this is a little shaky, or this is very clean, or whoa, get the heck out and don't come back, or burn it down. I've seen a couple of those. This is only a candidate for arson. And then mycotoxin can actually, I think I've had 2 or 3 of those where I said, move out, you don't get to take anything with you, burn it down. That's all it's good for, but not very often. Mycotoxins we can also test for by taking a section of the furnace filter and looking for the toxins themselves. So we can do both of those things.
Those are at-home things versus the company that comes in.
These are things you can order yourself on the internet and take the sample yourself and send them into the lab. Okay, testing yourself for mold. There is a whole battery of blood tests that really we have to credit to Richie Shoemaker for coming up with. Those are good for identifying mold toxicity in the first place. They're not as good for tracking on the treatment process. The urine mycotoxin test is better for that. And that's the second test that I mentioned, is the urine test, where we give glutathione either intravenously or orally in liposomal form, and ideally put somebody in an infrared sauna to pull the stuff out of the tissues. And then we collect urine, and both Great Plains and Real Time Labs offer very reputable tests that we can stand behind. So that's your crash course in mold. And I think we still have plenty of time left for questions.
Perfect. So you guys can chat them in. There has been some, so I'll just skip those. Do you recommend all people just take charcoal since it's like available and OTC, and if you're feeling icky, would you just take it?
Yes, that's why charcoal is that's in most people's medicine cabinets. I find when I say, well, what do you have at home? Well, do you have charcoal? Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got charcoal. I take that, if I get into something I shouldn't have, or my stomach is upset. So yeah, for the most part, it's not going to hurt anybody to take a toxin binder unless it's taken too near to meds. So the rule with toxin binders is they should always be taken 2 hours away from medications. And that's true for just about all binders. And then we also have to think about nutrient status long-term. So on a few occasions, I have had some people get kind of depleted from taking large amounts of binders over long periods of time, like say a year or 2. But outside of those scenarios, yeah, it's very safe to do a trial of any of those binders.
When you take binders, will you get worse before you get better? How does that work on your joints? I've heard that happens.
Oh, good question. So most of the time I find that people, when we get them on the binders, they just start to feel better. If they only do one thing, I put them on binders. They're typically well tolerated, and middle of the road dosing is take it once a day in between other things. And if it feels like, whoa, this is making me feel worse, something's up. That's not normal. So in those cases, sometimes with very sensitive people, I have on a couple of occasions had people take 1 or 2 chlorella tablets, usually like this big, they're really tiny, twice a week. Those have been some of my
Goodness.
worst
Okay.
cases. So, you know, sometimes more is more and sometimes less is more. So if it's bothering you, it's probably a sign you're just so full of toxins that you put a little mold magnet in the guts to suck stuff up and it's just pouring out of the tissues.
Okay, perfect. Allergy testing. So if you're super allergic to all sorts of things, would you recommend allergy testing first or coming to see you first or a combination of both? Or how would that, if you find yourself in that predicament?
That can work any which way. So it is helpful to identify what you're allergic to because you probably gotta avoid that stuff for a while. Sometimes people really do have to pare down what they're putting into their bodies for a time before they can before they feel better enough that they can tolerate those things again. So true food allergy is something that even people's normal primary care physicians will do food sensitivity testing. You're usually going to have to see somebody who's more like a functional medicine, naturopathic kind of doctor to get good testing there. And some of the better food sensitivity tests also include mold panels and environmental allergy panels. And sometimes that can be very helpful just to say, well, I may not get rid of my cat or my dog, but I can probably get rid of the dairy and the wheat and the whatever else is really flaring me up.
Perfect. And then how do you test a house, which you kind of alluded to, but first and foremost, maybe do that initial test and then get a company, or what would be the process for
So
that?
testing the house, the best way, the way that I like to approach that is to get an ERMI. The ERMI stands for Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. It tests for about 40, I think it's actually 41 different kinds of molds, 30 of which are potentially toxic and about 11 of which are just normal, everywhere, outdoor molds that don't harm anybody. And they'll give you a score of like, yes, we expect to find this many mold spores because we are on planet Earth. That is totally normal. But these are the bad guys that can cause you illness. And the ratio of bad molds to good molds is this number. And if that environmental relative moldiness index is above 2.0, you probably have an issue you need to look at. And keep in mind that with that ERMI test, it's a dust cloth test. It's a Swiffer cloth, and you just take it and dust normal household surfaces. I'm going to give that test about a 95% in terms of sensitivity for finding a problem. But I've had a couple of cases that really taught me a lesson, is that we can't rely only on that. If we have sick people in the building and we have what appears to be a clean ERMI, we still need to test the people for mycotoxins and we need to test the house for mycotoxins, because I can think of a couple of cases right off the top of my head where the mold was literally very well encapsulated under a bathroom floor and inside of a bathroom wall and several adjoining walls. And the ERMI came out completely clean. And it wasn't until we did mycotoxin testing on the family members that we went, I think we better start tearing into walls. And when we started tearing into walls, it was a complete disaster. So the ERMI is the best place to start, but not foolproof. So avail yourself of all the tests.
Perfect. And then what was the name of the product to clean mold?
Enzacare, Enzacare. And if you want to purchase that to have your mold contractor use, Montana Basement Solutions, you can just call up Montana Basement Solutions and they will sell the Enzacare product, which is safe to put in a fogger, which you can buy a Fog Master Junior for 99 bucks on Amazon and fog your own house. And you can buy an Ulpa vacuum if your mold contractor says, well, I never heard of an Ulpa. Well, that's what we're going to use to clean this up.
Right. You need a mold contractor. Yeah. Perfect. So I recently got a urine test back with high levels of DEN and oxytocin A.
I'm going to assume that's zearalenone and ochratoxin.
There we go. I'm working with a dietitian, started detox with binders, but you mentioned also cleaning out the sinuses. What would you mind sharing for the use of clearing them out?
Yeah, there are a couple of really simple over-the-counter things that work great. One is Xylear. It's a xylitol nasal spray with grapefruit seed extract. So that's safe for pretty much everybody unless one's allergic to grapefruit. So you can get that pretty much in any health food store or on Amazon. And that Xylir, the xylitol helps to break into biofilms in the nasal cavity. And I recommend starting with that first without souping it up at all, because it's pretty well tolerated. And once you have a feeling for that, you can actually soup it up with some essential oils and put into the 2-ounce bottle, a max of about 5 drops. I'm off the hook. If you put more than 5 drops, you heard it from me. Don't put more than 5 drops of any essential oils in that bottle. You'll be cursing loudly and hopping around hollering. But you can add things like tea tree oil, eucalyptus, lemon, any of those antimicrobial oils, thieves, On Guard, those types of things. And those can further help with the antifungal, cleanup in the sinuses. And remember, your sinuses are not, they're not just down here. So when you spray a nasal spray and it goes up, gravity is going to work against you. So to really get the most out of your nasal sprays, you need to get the head upside down to get up into those frontal and ethmoidal sinuses. And then there are more advanced techniques, but that's what you can do just over the counter.
Someone also says, is silver recommended for your sinuses?
Oh, silver's great. Yeah, silver's fantastic. If you've got mold in there though, expect some burning. You can use Argentin 23, Sovereign Silver. There are a few good products, and they do make some vertical sprays of those, meaning nasal spray, but you can also just use the liquid and use the dropper bottle and just hang your head over the edge of the bed or the sofa and drop that stuff in there. That's very, very effective.
Very good. We're buying a house and the mold test guy said that there was penicillin mold under the sink. Is that bad mold?
Yes, that's a bad one. That's a bad one. So good job for having that inspected. That's one thing I forgot to touch on. I've had a bunch of patients up here in Montana say, oh, doc, my house is brand new. There's no way that there can be mold. And I said, well, go look in the crawl space for me anyway. And people, before they've even moved into homes up here, because a lot of the homes are being built in the rainy season, I've seen homes sealed up over a completely damp crawl space where before the new owners even move in, the entire basement or crawl space is literally covered in mold. I've had quite a few of those. So just because it's new doesn't mean that it's all good. So yeah, if it's got penicillium or aspergillus, you got to get that cleaned up before you move in.
Okay, your thoughts on a new home biotic test endorsed by Dave Asprey as a test for both molds and bacteria?
Ooh, home biotic.
Yeah.
Oh, Dave Asprey's pretty, he's got some cool stuff. I have not seen that particular test, but if it's testing for mold spores and mold toxins, I haven't looked at the test, so I can't endorse it. But what I can say is I can definitely stand behind the ERMI test.
Perfect. The same person was talked about Jill Carnahan.
Oh, Jill Carnahan's she's a friend. So I've worked closely with her for many years. She used to refer me a lot of Lyme patients. So I've worked very, very closely with Jill over many years. She's wonderful, just absolutely wonderful.
I think that's all the questions.
All right.
Thank you
so guys,
much.
My contact info is there if you have any further questions, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We will post this online on our website. So we'll have a link on our Facebook page or Instagram, and then we'll definitely look for more education series from us. We're starting our remote 2020. So, we did our first two actually, and then we got derailed by COVID. So we're back in action with our 2020 series. And so just watch for those to pop up through that channel. And we just thank you so much for coming. We appreciate working with you.
My pleasure. And I see some familiar faces. So hi, guys.
Very good. Have a great night.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, they're typing in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. B. You're wonderful. Yes, you